If you don't have one already, pick one up, and if you can make any donation, we would appreciate that too, to offset our costs for bringing Roy here.
You mean I'm getting paid?
Expenses only, Roy. Roy was born in the USA in 1943, and he was a civil rights worker for the NAACP and Corps in Mississippi and Alabama, 1961 to 63. He has a Bachelor of Arts from Maryville College in Tennessee and a Master's in Social Psychology at the University of Chicago. In 1967-68, Roy worked with the Chicago Ecumenical Committee, and he was an organizer of resistance to the war in Vietnam. In 1969, he immigrated to Canada and became a Canadian citizen. Roy is a back-to-the-lander, self-employed, making custom-made wood furniture here in New Brunswick. Between 1981 and 2008, he had a career as a human resource manager, retiring in 2008 as human resources manager for a government of the Northwest Territories. And in 2009-10, he headed the organizing committee on NB Power Not for Sale campaign. In 2010, he worked with the organizing committee on democracy for New Brunswick. And I heard him when he gave his presentation in Fredericton. I think it was was that 2010 or 2011? 2010. 2010. And I was so impressed, I invited him to come speak here to us. And 2012 to 2015, Roy has been the coordinator of the New Brunswick Anti-Shale Gas Alliance. And with his wife Ethel, they live beside the Bay of Fundy at St. Mary's Point. They have, how many children?
Three children and 8 grandchildren.
And 8 grandchildren. So I'd like to welcome Roy.
Thank you very much for inviting me. One of the things that happened during the process of NB Power Not for Sale was that all of a sudden people began to believe that if we start working together, we can have a voice in affecting public policy. And as a result of that, we caused the then Liberal government to withdraw the Memorandum of Understanding for the sale of NB Power. And coming out of that, the group that organized that, it was a group of probably 30 people. About 10 or 12 of us said that, now that we have this kind of leverage, especially with the incoming government, why don't we have a look at the Commission on Legislative Democracy, which the Lord government in 2004 had commissioned in order to study what are the things about democratic action in New Brunswick that could really be improved, and that recommendation has traveled all over North America and also to Europe. And it's really a model analysis of why there is such a decline in citizens' involvement in democratic processes. So we said, okay, while we have some influence here with the government, why don't we see if we can't get the political parties running in the 2010 election to respond to the issues that were raised in that commission. So the reason that the recommendations hadn't been implemented by the Lord government was because of the election that was called in 2006, and they were replaced by a Liberal government. But when you consider, it was a very progressive move on the part of a progressive conservative government to say there's some significant problems that we're having with democracy, and let's analyze them and see what we can do about that. Unfortunately, the government was defeated in the next election, and so none of those recommendations were implemented. So with Democracy in New Brunswick, that was just a morph of NB Power Not for Sale, we said, why don't we challenge the political parties to say that if elected, what would you do about the recommendations that were made in this study? And if you'll recall back then, what we did was we created a series of report cards. 4 months prior to the election, we said, we're going to send a questionnaire to each party and say, where do you stand on these 9 issues surrounding democratic reform? And what we're looking for is, we want to know what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and when you're going to do it if you're elected. Okay? And so that we're going to publish this report monthly. Okay? And the summertime before an election is a really good time to do this, because news is dead in the summertime. So we had an opportunity to get lots of press for this report card that we produced. And all of the political parties, by the time of the election, had responded specifically with those kind of, how they would respond to those 9 issues. And we graded those, and we said, in terms of this particular issue, this is what you can count on from each of the parties to this election. So it gives you some choices about your vote. And I think it was pretty effective in terms of getting the parties to respond to a citizen-based initiative. And it was very encouraging, because it followed right on what we had done with NB Power Not for Sale. And we were really enthusiastic about it, and it got us interviews within the first 6 months, 3 or 4 interviews with the inner circle of David Allward's government, in pinning them down to do what they actually said that they would do in the election. Unfortunately, the only traction that we really got on those 9 issues was they did bring in the new referendum legislation for New Brunswick. And it's one of the better ones in North America. It's based on a 50% plus 1 on referendums. Many of the referendum legislations in North America have much higher thresholds for approval. The one restriction on it was that it couldn't be citizen initiated. It had to be initiated by the actual government. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it was a pretty sound legislation that they brought in. But unfortunately, it was one of the few recommendations that they actually acted on. That's how I got involved with the issue of proportional representation, because as far as I was concerned, our first past the post electoral system is really undemocratic, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And this is the first time since 2010 that I think I've spoken about this, so I really had to go back and dig through my old notes, and then also on the internet to see if there have been any significant changes in the interim, and there really hasn't been. But so what I'd like to do is just talk about the need for democratic reform and the reasons behind that. In 2004, as I mentioned before, the Commission on Legislative Democracy stated on page 9 that it's clear to the Commission that the current single-member plurality electoral system, which is the fancy term for first past the post, is not meeting the democratic values and needs of New Brunswickers. In 2011, the Desrud and Waite report came out, and it was called Proposals for Legislative Reform in New Brunswick. They stated, we believe that external reforms, in particular reforms to the province's electoral system, are necessary, long overdue, and essential if New Brunswick government system can be successful in re-engaging the province's citizens. Okay, so we have two commissions by governments saying we really need to do something about this, folks. but there hasn't been any action taken on these. Further in the report of the Commission on Legislative Democracy, it says there's a democratic disquiet in New Brunswick. We believe then that the province's electoral system are necessary, long overdue, and essential if New Brunswick's governance system is to successfully re-engage the province's. I'm sorry, I'm skipping around here. Said that the vote, there's democratic disquiet in New Brunswick. New Brunswickers are participating less and less in the electoral process. Voter turnout is declining. New Brunswickers have left confidence and trust in the political leaders and institutions, and their attitudes towards government are increasingly negative. Young people are less engaged in the democratic process, and their knowledge level of democracy and how government works has really diminished. Okay? So what's wrong with the electoral system? And there are several concrete things that we can really put our finger on. There are several consistent indicators of the problems with first-past-the-post electoral system. The first is that the popular vote is not reflected in the allocation of elected seats. During the last 8 elections, and you've got a handout here that gives you a graphic representation of the outcome of the last 8 elections. During the last 8 elections, the parties that did not win a majority received an average of just below 50% of the popular vote, but elected only 24% of the seats. It's no wonder that many voters feel that their vote simply doesn't count. If you take a minute and look at the handout, you'll see just how distorted the election results are. The worst example, of course, is in the 1987 election. This is the election of Frank McKenna, that received 60% of the popular vote, but 100% of the actual allocation of seats. Okay? And there was an 81.9% voter turnout in that election. I mean, there was a lot of stimulation. I think there was a lot of issues around Richard Hatfield, and the voters voted with their feet and really turfed out the progressive conservatives, who got 28% of the vote, but no seats. And then the NDP got 11% of the popular vote and no seats. The worst, that's the worst example of this, but the elections of 2003 and 2006, you'll notice, are the only ones where the allocations of seats is very proportionate to the results in the popular vote. But all the way through this piece, it's obvious that the popular vote really didn't translate into the election of MLAs that represented their party. And federally, we know that in the 2011 election, the PC formed a majority with 39% of the votes, with only 61% voter turnout. That represents about 24% they were elected with a majority government with essentially 24% of the eligible voters in Canada. And that's the government that we're currently, I would say, stuck with.
Suffering under.
So there's a real problem in that people have a feeling that their votes just don't count, and it's for good reason. The second reason is that elections using first-past-the-post rarely elect third-party seats. You'll notice that with the exception of the core party in 1991 and the New Democrats party in 91 and 95, 95 and 99, it's the only time that NDP candidates were elected, and that was Elizabeth Weir. And then in 2014, David Kuhn's election in Fredericton was one of the rare events, and personally, I think we're very fortunate to have David in the Legislative Assembly, and it was rather remarkable that he beat Craig Leonard in that election, a person who had a great deal of public recognition, especially through the whole shale gas issue. Quite an accomplishment for the Green Party to have won that seat. So we have a consistent problem of the vote not counting. But the other thing that you've got is that voter turnout has seriously declined since 1997, when it was 81.9%, and now in 2014, this election result was 63% voter turnout. So people are really turned off. They don't believe that their votes really count. And they're frustrated with the lack of responsiveness and accountability on the part of governments. Another important aspect of elections is that it's important that all votes count, but it's also important that all votes count equally. Right? And where this comes up is that in any particular riding, the number of eligible voters should be relatively the same number across the province. Otherwise, if you're in a riding with a small number of voters and somebody else is voting in a riding that is significantly larger, then you that vote in a small riding, your vote counts much stronger than a vote in the larger riding. And then there's quite a lot of disparity among ridings in New Brunswick, despite the fact that between 2010 and 2014 election, the electoral boundaries were changed. They reduced the number of MLAs from 55 down to 49, and so there was a redrawing of electoral boundaries. But there was still a great deal of disparity between some ridings, and I'll give you a couple examples of that. In the Greater Moncton area, the riding of Dieppe had 9,821 eligible voters, but in Moncton Northwest, there were 5,232 voters. So that's an 86% difference between those two ridings. So if you were in Moncton Northwest, your vote counted a good deal more than if you voted in Dieppe. Okay? Another example, in the Fredericton area, Fredericton Grand Lake riding had 7,229 eligible voters, but Fredericton South had only 4,500. That's a 60% difference in the number of voters. Another example, in the St. John area, Quispan-Sips had over 8,000 voters, but St. John Harbor had 4,345 voters. There's an 85% disparity. Okay? One of the potential, and I'm not suggesting that this happened in the way that the boundaries were redrawn, but you've all heard the term gerrymandering, and that's a process by which the current government, who is considering the realignment of electoral boundaries, can say, well, we know that if you're in Albert County, that the chances of electing a PC or a liberal or anybody else is a snowball's chance in hell, you know. And so let's expand that riding a bit, because we're sure we're going to get a majority there. And so you can introduce some other votes because it's a safe riding if you're the Progressive Conservative Party. And I don't mean to sound what's the right word? I don't have any party affiliations. Okay, I'm not trying to be partisan in it. I'm just using examples. But gerrymandering is a real problem. And that's the reason why you really need an independent electoral commission to run the elections, so that there's no vested interest in the drawing of these ridings. And I'm not saying that disparity is there in order to manipulate the vote, but it raises a question in your in your mind, and it also makes the people in those larger voters and the larger ridings feel that their vote is less significant than if they were voting in a riding that's only half the size. Okay? So that's one of the things that's important to correct an electoral system where there is that kind of disparity. The rule of thumb is that it shouldn't exceed 15%, the difference between the number of people in one riding and in another. Now there's some extenuating circumstances. For instance, on the Acadian Peninsula, during the last 15 years, there's been a mass exodus of francophones from the peninsula down to live in Dieppe. That creates a real challenge for an electoral commission, okay? But you still have to deal with it. Okay? For instance, that Dieppe riding could have been divided in half, okay? in order to create a better balance. But the way it was done was you've concentrated twice as many voters in one riding there than in a riding that's only 2 kilometers away. Okay, so another problem in our electoral system is that women have been consistently underrepresented in the legislative assembly. Women make up 51% of the New Brunswick population. In the 8 elections held between '87 and 2014, an average of only 20% of the candidates were women, and only an average of 14.8% of elected MLAs were female. The number of candidates for the Liberal and PC parties rarely exceeded 20%. However, during the past 25 years, the NDP party has run between 27 and 44% female candidates. During the 2010 election, 45% of the Green Party candidates were female, and 33% of NDP candidates were female. I don't have the exact figures for the 2014 election, but they're very similar. Both the NDP and the Green Party had a large number of female candidates. Unfortunately, they weren't elected. Another problem of the first past the post electoral system is that it tends to produce large majority governments and weak opposition parties. In the handout, you'll notice that only in 2003, 2006, and 2014 did we elect a substantial number of opposition MLAs. In addition, with first past the post electoral systems, only rarely are third and fourth party representatives elected. So the system really favors the dominance of the two-party system. And that's the reason for there's so much resistance from both the Liberal Party and the PC Party, whether federally or provincially, is that they don't want third, fourth, and fifth parties with elected seats. They'd rather have the PCs get elected rather than the Liberals than to have to compete with minority party representatives in the Legislative Assembly. Okay? So they have a vested interest in keeping it the way that it is. And when Democracy for New Brunswick met with the executive assistant with David Allward, David was very frank about it. He said, personally, I really believe in proportional representation, but he said, you'd never get past the PC caucus, and the same is true with the Liberals. Now, right now, we've got Thomas Mulcahy in the lead up to the 2015 federal election coming out in favor of proportional representation, but you've got Justin Trudeau saying, nah, I don't think so. Okay? Now, you would think that Trudeau would use that opportunity. Mulcahy is going to say, Thomas Mulcahy is going to say this. You would think that Trudeau would want to get on that bandwagon, but the party would not support it. He may personally believe in it, okay, but you'd never get it past the party brass. Okay? So we know that there's significant problems with our current electoral system, but how do we know that a switch to proportional representation electoral system will actually solve the problems? Well, we've got some statistics about this that indicate that it does. The most comprehensive analysis of the benefits of proportional representation was conducted by a man named Arndt Liphart, and he did a study titled Patterns of Democracy, government forms and performance in 36 countries. And he did this study during the period of 1971 to 1995. And it involved 36 countries. He compared this data with the data from countries using a first-past-the-post electoral system. His analysis identified 3 definitive benefits of proportional representation and 5 benefits that he called contributory. And those I want to go through so that, you know.
Just a really self-serving question. I can't keep up. Can I have those notes later? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll send you the video.
I'm pretty sure that it's factual.
No, I believe you. I'm listening to it.
Yeah, it's hard.
I wasn't trained to do this.
The 3 definitive benefits of proportional representation. The first is that the proportion of seats elected in the legislative assemblies for each party was closely reflective in the proportion of the popular vote received by each party. So it deals with that issue of every vote counted. So it's not a perfect system, but it's the closest way of getting to where the actual seats elected are closely reflective of the popular vote. Okay? The second thing that was a definite result of proportional representation is the percentage of women elected in 36 countries using PR was 6.7% higher than in those countries using first-past-the-post. And in Wales, the increase was 47% higher for women elected and 33% higher in Scotland and New Zealand. So pretty significant impact in terms of getting women elected. You know, it's never a simple issue that it's just the electoral system that does that. But this seemed to be a consistent result in the countries that used the PR system. And in countries using PR, the average number of parties with elected seats was 0.4.0. In countries using first-past-the-post, the average number of parties with elected seats was only 2.1. And this is in a large number of countries. We're talking about, there are 90 countries using PR, so there are more than 90 that are using first-past-the-post. So if the average in those 90 countries are 4.0 party representatives compared to 2.1, that's pretty significant impact on the electoral system has. The 5 contributory benefits that he found were that citizens in countries using the PR system were 17% more satisfied with the democratic performance of their government than the citizens in countries using first-past-the-post. Citizens in countries using PR were 16% more satisfied with the election results. And these are results that were found from polls that were taken following the election. Voter turnout was 7.5% higher in countries using the PR system, especially in countries where socioeconomic disparity was not too great and where students and youth were exposed to civics programs in schools. And they felt that this was a really important aspect of engaging younger voters. And it's one of the failures, I think, in our current school system because our students are really disengaged. For instance, in the last 2 provincial elections, just under 50% of the eligible voters in the 18 to 24 and 18 to 35 year demographics, only 50% voted in either of those last 2 elections.
I've tried for years when I was teaching high school to get the government to bring in citizenship education.
Yeah.
I was on a committee with Kelly Lamrock, 25 people on the committee. We met every 3 months and then met again, and then met again, and then met again. I have no idea whatever happened to the report. Nothing was ever done. I pursued them on that also, but and it's an outcome. Like, it is an outcome in the curriculum.
On the other side.
In countries using PR, citizens were 5% more satisfied with the public policies decisions made by the government. And the other interesting thing that he found was that there was no measurable difference in the stability of governments after the switch to a PR system. Because one of the criticisms of PR that's really unfounded was that the opponents to it say, we're going to have a whole bunch of minority governments, there's going to be non-confidence votes, and then we're going to have to go back and have another expensive election. It's just not true. It doesn't happen that way. They are more likely to produce, no, I've already said that. They are not likely to produce unstable minority governments. Feel free to ask questions or comments or whatever. Stop. Don't be shy. No, stop it, man.
Can I try one more?
Yeah, sure.
In some reading that I did in proportional representation in the past, there seem to be several models that were out there. I mentioned that earlier. Yeah. Is there sort of a stream that we can follow that applies to them all? Or are you going to talk about...
I'm going to talk about the one that was recommended for us, which is also the prevailing model that's currently being used. And just to summarize that, so we know from PR electoral systems, they tend to produce a higher correlation between the popular vote and the allocation of seats, an increase in the election of third and fourth party candidates, a higher representative of elected women. Voter turnout is consistently higher. There's no difference between the stability of the governments elected, and there is a higher level of citizen satisfaction with the performance of governments elected in systems using proportional representation. There are currently 90 countries using a proportional system, and 13 of the countries that are represented in the G20 that are using proportional representation. I just want to refer to, it's really interesting, and you think of the G20 as being the most democratized countries and advanced systems in the world. The 13 countries that are using PR in the G20 are Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Russia, South Africa, South Korea, and Turkey. The 7 that aren't using it are Canada, China, the European Union, France, Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom, and the United States. Pretty sad commentary on advanced, what we consider to be the advanced economic and democratic countries in the world. And I've got a list of 90 others that you wouldn't expect to be, on that list. But clearly, the majority of developed countries are using proportional representation. And the big holdouts are all primarily for the same reason, is that they want to be able to consolidate the power of the two, essentially the two ruling parties.
Except for China, where there's only one party.
Yeah. Okay, any questions or comments about that?
Russia's a kind of a surprise.
Yeah.
I didn't even know they had democracy there.
Well, that was the thing I was thinking a while ago too, when you said there were 90 countries that do PR, 90 countries that don't, and so it's roughly 50-50, but there's a lot of democracy, but there's so many countries that just pay lip service to it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all it is, and Canada for one.
Okay. But if you think about the process that the Liberal and PC parties use for electing party leaders, it's a proportional system. It's like the single transferable vote, is that you create a percentage that they have to receive on the first ballot. After that, the people, after they've exceeded that threshold, votes can be transferred down to the next, to the next candidate, and so you have this runoff process. You've eliminated the people who get the least of the votes, okay? And then you have a subsequent vote on the remaining candidates, and eventually you get down to where one candidate has gets the nod as the leader. That's a proportional system. So even within their parties, they're using a proportional system, but they want to stick with first past the post when they go to the popular vote.
Tobic Mactapac Liberals didn't do that. And they did not use that system at all. It was basically one shot.
One shot?
It's been being contested there now. Something like John McKay up in the same idea. The irregularities.
Can I ask you, so these countries that have changed to those systems, how did they do it? Did their governments do it? Or if it's a democratic country, can the people vote it in, or does it have to come from government?
In some countries it was done through a referendum, and in some the existing government just said this is an idea whose time has come, and it's time to just do this, because it's the right thing to do. Personally, I'm glad that we have a referendum legislation here in New Brunswick, but personally, my feeling is a referendum is not a good way to really get your finger on the pulse of the population. It's too easy to manipulate the results of a referendum, and it allows a 50% plus one vote to become the law of the land.
And it's not even 50% plus 1%.
That's
If
right.
there's 10 million people, it's 5 million and one person, which means it's 4,999,099
We're
people
dissatisfied.
who are not represented. And when you mentioned that earlier, that it was good that we had the referendum, and I agree. On the other hand, you're still having a significantly large proportion of people who would not receive the representation that they would have wanted in a referendum.
That's right.
And a referendum with an educated or a politically sophisticated populace would be one thing, but
That's right.
in a politically ignorant populace, God knows what's going to happen.
Yeah. And one of the key factors in the success of referendums is the degree of public education that goes on in advance. And if you think about the situation here in New Brunswick, where one organization owns 90% of the print media in the province, their ability to influence popular opinion about a variety of issues, the public is really vulnerable to that kind of thing. So you need the support of a media that is prepared to provide equal opportunity for all sides of an argument, and we've got a real democratic deficit here in New Brunswick. There have been 4 commissions that have said that for one family to own to have the influence over 90% of the print media is just inappropriate in a modern democracy. The most recent was done, the recent commission on that was done last year by the London School of Economics, and they said this is just unheard of in a modern
On New Brunswick,
democracy.
they studied New Brunswick?
Studied New Brunswick.
Wow.
They said this is the worst example that they've come up against in a democratized country.
Wow.
That this is just not acceptable. And it had nothing to do about the Irvings in particular. It's just that it's bad government to have the public source of information controlled by any particular perspective on whatever the issue happens to be. We've certainly run into that in terms of the whole shale gas issue that I've been involved in for the last several years, and that Sam has been involved in for the last several years. Okay, so the question is, so which form of proportional representation is the most appropriate? And again, the Commission on Legislative Democracy studied them all, and they talked with the people that were using various systems, and the one that they came up with as a recommendation, and they called it a Made in New Brunswick mixed member electoral system. During the last 10 years, commissions in Ontario, Quebec, Prince Edward Island have recommended the same mixed member proportional representation. And it's also and in British Columbia, they looked for they were recommending a single transferable vote, which is the one that I described about how the parties choose their leaders. Okay. The appeal of this system is that it's a blend of first past the post and also the PR, proportional representation. Since 2005, 5 Canadian provinces have considered changing their electoral system. Ontario, Quebec, PEI, and New Brunswick recommended a mixed member, a proportional system. BC, a single transferable vote system, and the system that Thomas Mulcair has recommended for Canada, that if the NDP forms the government, that they will bring in a mixed member proportional system. So how would a proportional system work? And I'm going to, you've all got a sample ballot here, and so I've used the statistics that were present in 2005 when the commission did this study, just so that it's easy for you to see how it works. Okay, so what they recommended was that we increase at that time there were 55 MLAs, okay, all elected by first past the post. Okay, what they suggested is, in order to have an even number, let's increase that to 56. It's now down at 49. You could easily move it to 20, to 50 MLAs or 48. But I'm going to use the system that they use because it's easy to present the information to you. And then they said it's really important that we allow the proportional aspect of the election to be reflective of the geographical and cultural areas of the province. And they said if you divide the province horizontally and vertically into 4 areas, there are significant cultural and cultural differences. So if we divide the province into 4 regions, okay, we can have, and they would be northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. Okay, each of the 4 regions would have 8 constituencies each. Okay? Each of the 8 constituencies of the 4 regions would elect 1 constituency MLA. So you would have your local MLA for Woodstock, okay? And they would be elected by first past the vote. Whoever got the most votes, and that would be on this side of that sample ballot that you have. So in that case, you're voting for the constituency. You're voting for the candidate in your riding that you think is the best representative. Okay? This results in a total of 36 constituency MLAs. So everybody gets an MLA for their riding. And then to accomplish the proportional representation, each of those 4 regions would also elect 5 proportional MLAs. The result, and this results in an additional 20 MLAs, which brings it 36 plus 20, gets you 56 total MLAs. There's no difference in the status of all 56 MLAs. Once they're elected, they all have equal status. But at least one person is elected directly from your riding.
How does political parties in there's no difference in how they operate? I mean, there'll be a difference in how they operate, but if one person runs to be the candidate, or somebody runs to be the general, or
That's right.
about
One for, if you look at this and you said, one runs for the PCs,
Okay.
one for the Liberals, one for the NDP, one for the Green,
Okay.
it's the same thing.
Okay.
But you're voting specifically for the person that you know in your riding and who you feel you would like to represent you in the Legislative Assembly. Okay? But then on this side, what it's saying is that each party will nominate 5 candidates in each region, okay, who will constitute the representation for the party So you have a chance to vote for a candidate on the one ballot, and on the second ballot, you're voting for the party of your choice. And they're not always the same. You might say that Joe Blow is the best person to represent your riding, but you may believe that the Green Party platform is the one that you believe most strongly in, okay? As opposed to the Green Party's candidate in your riding. So this gives you a chance to vote for a specific candidate and another opportunity to vote for the party whose platform really turns you on. Okay? So what would happen at election is that the first vote count would be for each of the constituents, each of the candidates that are running in your constituency, and then the vote would be counted across your whole region of which party received the most votes. So if then just by a simple mathematics, if the PCs received 40% of that popular vote, the proportional vote, then they would get 2 of the 5 PR candidates. If the Liberals received 40% of the vote, they would get another 2 of those proportional seats. If the NDP got 10% of the vote, they would get 1 representative, and if the Green Party received a lower number, then there would be no representative. In this case, in this example, the Green Party could get 10% of the vote, and they would get an additional seat.
And the party would choose which ones of those?
In advance. So they would have to say, when you vote on these party votes,
Right.
here are the list of the conservative candidates that in descending order
Okay.
that we would elect.
Okay.
So if the PC's got 40% of the votes, they're going to get 2 representatives.
And it
so
would be the first 2 on the list.
on their list.
Right.
That's called a closed list.
Okay.
And that's what was recommended by the commission. And in most of the countries using this system, that's what's represented. Because they don't want the parties to parachute people in from a general pool of candidates
Right.
just because they like that person the best. This way, you know who's likely to be, if you vote Green, you know which candidate is most likely to be the one that gets elected in the proportional
In your region.
process.
Yeah, but what about 42%? What do you do with that?
Good question. Okay, somebody else thought of this. Okay?
Yeah, I would think so.
And I'm not going to present that formula to you, but it's called the DeHunt formula that was worked out in order to deal with what if it's 42% and 28% and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it does work out relatively proportionately and certainly more proportionate than it currently does, but there's no perfect system. The other condition is that for any party that receives less than 5% of the vote, that those votes are dropped because it's too small a percentage to factor into that formula. And they're saying that if a party really receives less than 5% of the vote, it's not significant enough to say that it's unfair if we drop those votes. So that seems to be the accepted threshold for which a party receiving a small amount of votes would just be discarded in that election. So like I said, it's not a perfect system, but it gets the closest proximity to the translation of the popular vote into the elected seats. Okay? And it's not you're not completely throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because I think a lot of voters want a specific person to represent them, and so they get that chance. So there's one person in that riding that they cast a vote for. And then it's the regional seats that do the adjustment to bring out the proportionality.
Okay, but the person votes on the left there,
Yes.
they aren't they are to factor in in determining the proportion.
No,
So only the votes over
that's
here.
right. It's like two different aspects of the same election.
Yeah.
Any questions about that? Yeah.
So the ridings would have to be significantly bigger than if you're taking a quarter of the province. You might have, what, 15,000 in a riding if you only have.
You'd have even more than that.
Well,
Yeah,
more than
you're
that.
going to have to do some juggling there.
Yeah.
And it may be that the number of people per riding would have to be a higher percentage than you would like to have. Because, for instance, how do you divide up Dieppe and Moncton? You know, I mean, it's a huge number of people. There would be, what, 130,000 people eligible voters. It's a big part. So there needs to be some juggling, and it may not be perfect. The population of the northern half of New Brunswick is significantly lower than the other.
So therefore, you get into your situation where they were more. They had a
That's
better
right.
chance of electing candidates than.
Yeah, but you know the equality of your vote might be compromised,
Yes.
but at least it all gets counted. And that's might be the trade-off. It's not a perfect solution. You know, if you had a cosmopolitan area where that you could divide up in a relatively equal thing, but I think what they're saying is that it's more important to get the popular vote reflected in the allocation of seats than it is to worry about whether John had more power in their vote in Restigouche than somebody did in Dieppe. It's all going to be a compromise. But this one gets it closer to the actual allocation of seats based on the popular vote.
How would you see that working for Canada? Like if say, some provinces have more members of parliament than others?
Yeah. Well, and if you're going on proportionality,
Yeah.
What it does is you have to deal with it in that province to make that as proportional as you possibly can, and then have the cumulative effect of all the provinces and territories, do the decision. But at least in Ontario, if that vote if the allocation of seats was proportionate, okay, and it was proportionate in Manitoba and it was proportionate in, you know what I mean?
But that doesn't affect proportional representation because some people's vote would still mean more than others?
It would be in terms of the number of votes in a particular riding. I don't know how you can solve all the problems with a country that we have that is as much rural and urban as we are. What do you do in the territories? There are 35,000 people in the Northwest Territories.
But I can see where having your vote count is more important than how much it counts.
That's right.
Right now, if I vote for the Green Party in Carleton, my vote, it's gone.
As we said, over half of the votes are discarded.
Yeah.
They have no influence whatsoever.
Yeah.
So this at least is an improvement on the current system.
Well, I agree it's a big improvement. I just see maybe it's a first step into total reform, but it's a huge step forward. So you said that government can change it or you can change it by referendum. So and you said neither one of those are great options. The government isn't going to change it, and if you don't recommend a referendum, do you have a recommendation?
Personally,
Yes.
what I would like to see is a government to say, we need to change this because it's the right thing to do. And that just takes some courage, and it also means that they're going to have to stand up to the backroom boys in their party that have a vested interest in keeping things the way that they are.
Well, I know it's part of the Green Party platform. Is it? And it's definitely not PC or Liberal. What about the NDP? Are they?
Yeah.
Is it part of their platform? Or?
The NDP in New Brunswick, I think, came out in favor of proportional. The Green Party did, and so did the People's Alliance Party.
The marijuana party probably hasn't gotten to it yet.
No.
Bog down.
Another rhinoceros.
Harvest
Too
season.
busy looking for something to eat.
Harvest season.
Could I get clarified
Sure.
what are the reasons for the Commission's recommendations for a system that really only accounts for, if I understand it right, less than 40% of the results based on proportionality? The majority of the system would still be the old
Yeah, yes, you're right.
system. Why did they decide to compromise at such a low level between, I'd say, 35 and 40%
Yeah.
consistent?
They said it was an improvement on the old, and
Absolutely.
because there's such a resistance to change, and electoral reform isn't a hot ticket item, it's a theoretical issue, it's not a gut level issue for a lot of people. They said, here's a way of bridging between what is currently what we consider to be a bad electoral system and a straight PR system, which would be complex and because people resist change, would be most likely to be rejected by the total population. Here's a way of compromising between the desire to have a specific representative representing you in your home riding, and then a PR system that is adjusted regionally. And like I said, it's not perfect. But to go to just a straight PR system has caused a lot of problems in other countries. So the pure system, there seems to be a lot of problems there, and in some cases they have reverted to the old first past the post rather than deal with the resistance to the pure PR system. This appeared to be, in the majority of countries using PR, to be the one that received the most public support. And the ones that were brought in by a progressive government were more likely to succeed than those that were put to a referendum. Because one of the unfortunate things is that the thresholds for referendum tend to be much higher than they are for just a regular election. And I can give you an example of that. I'm doing this from memory, but in the referendums that were held in British Columbia, they said that in order for the referendum to pass, and it was for the vote yes was for the new proportional system. For it to succeed, it had to receive 60% of the popular vote in 79% of the ridings. That's a really high threshold. I would call that
Impossible.
It's easier to change the Constitution.
It's called resistance to
it's
change.
just not fair. You've created a fail-safe in that vote. And unfortunately, they received 57.9% of all ridings voted in favor of this, but they failed to have the other threshold that was 70%. Yeah. Just a minute. Let me find this. I hate fudging on the specifics. The yes vote in British Columbia had to receive 60% of the province-wide vote, at least 50% plus one in 60% of the 79 voting districts. That's a really high threshold. Right? No wonder it failed, and it failed twice. Right? The second time by a significantly less of a vote, but when you get 57% province-wide in favor of a new electoral system, the thing should have been a fait accompli. And that's silly. personally, I think it should be 50% plus one if it has to go to a referendum. And that's what it would be if it was done here in New Brunswick.
Is that 50% plus one, is that of eligible voters or
Of
is it
eligible
voter
voters.
turnout?
Eligible voters.
Oh,
No, excuse me.
No, yeah.
No, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
It would be 51% of 50% plus one of the voters casting a ballot.
Right, yeah.
So
see, I'm not so opposed
it's a
to this.
crapshoot, it really is.
I'm not so opposed to the higher threshold. I like the idea of a referendum, I just find that there's too many people left out of it when it's that small. That the difference is just not big enough for me.
And my resistance to referendum is that it's very easy to make them fail, if that's what you want to achieve. So I don't have a solution for that. So personally, I would like to see the leadership come from the governing party to say, listen folks, we've been doing this poorly for a long time, let's fix it.
It seems so simple. I mean, that it's not working.
Yeah.
It's got to be fixed.
And if you're trying to bring around electoral reform at a time when voter turnout and engagement is so low, what are the chances of it succeeding, even if it's a great idea?
I mean, I'm with you in what you said earlier. I think really part of the solution long term, anyways, is re-educating or focusing some of the goals in the curriculum in New Brunswick, because it's teachers can teach citizenship outcomes. Sam, you might have seen it in some of your class, but they don't have to do anything. There's no measurement. I'm not saying standard, but there's just nothing. And somebody says, "I'll sweep over that. I don't want to do it," and there's nothing. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
And it shouldn't be an elective, it really should be a requirement.
I have recommendations I've sent into the department, had them sent back. Lovely job. I will consider this, but they're still sitting there.
Yeah, Roy, I was going to suggest that we should drop the voting age to probably 16, so that people
Yeah, I would
can
go for
learn
that.
how to vote in school.
Well, in one of my columns I wrote on that, Sam, and what I said was that I would support that, was David's recommendation. I would support that if there was a citizenship curriculum, a real focus on citizenship education in the schools, because what you'll have now is 16-year-olds who don't know very much about it, competing on votes, I mean, I had the debate at my school. I had the Green Party in there, all 4 or 5 parties that were in there at the time, and you know the party that won? The Green Party was the only party that wanted legalization of marijuana. Even the NDP candidate didn't want it. They swept that election. They swept it. It was a majority, not even a simple majority. It was a very vast, complicated majority.
Yeah, education is essential, you know.
And right from kindergarten.
Give the
right from grade
16-year-olds a vote, but make sure that they've been
Empower them.
aware of what's going on for the last 10 years, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I did my thing on the thesis on citizenship education using a professor of Manitoba, and that was just horrific. You think they could do everything that they do now and incorporate a lot of that stuff into it, and they'd exit much more knowledgeable and perhaps even active citizens. But right now, there's nothing. And the problem is the teachers are no better. I mean, half the teachers, I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm as there, and I'll include myself in it, but not educated. You'll talk in the staff room about everybody's, I don't want to rant here, sorry.
Okay.
That's why I write the column.
Well,
So
teachers,
the last aspect, go ahead.
Is it correct that PEI had a referendum on proportional representation and it lost?
They had a plebiscite and the vote was only 37% in favor.
How many turned out?
What were the factors there that caused it to fail? Do you have any sense of that?
That's the next thing I wanted to talk about. And the Fair Vote Canada in 2009 did an analysis of why the 4 referendums on proportional representation have failed. And they came up with 8 items that they said these seem to be the consistent failures in the process. First, that the public did not always have a clear sense of the desired end result. What was the change designed to fix? To this end, there needs to be an extensive grassroots public education campaign of what's wrong with the current system and how this alternative would fix those problems.
Right.
Okay? So public education and for instance on the NB Power Not for Sale and on the Our work that we did for a moratorium on shale gas development, those successes were based on the public education campaign that we did. Second item that they found was that the campaign requires strong leadership, organization, and financial resources. In order to reach those people, you've got to provide both the yes and the no side with significant financial resources in order to get accurate information to the public so that they can make a reasoned decision.
And this is from an analysis of the PEI situation?
This is an analysis of the 4 failed
Okay.
referenda in Canada on PR. Third, public apathy and resistance to change tended to be underestimated. So if people don't perceive the need for change, they're less likely to participate in the referendum that's deciding about change. So don't underestimate that, and you really have to beef up the public education. There was strong opposition by the 2 dominant parties, and it's important to get the current government to champion the change. That they felt that in none of those situations did the current party in power assist in the yes vote. In most cases, the threshold for the yes vote was way too high. It should be required that a simple majority or something approaching that would be the required threshold. Number 6 is it's essential that the initiative have an effective media campaign so that people understand the importance of what's being decided and what the choice between yes and no actually represents. The clarity of the wording of the referendum question is very important. It needs, if you want people to do a simple yes or no answer, you have to provide a simple question. Okay? And then the success of referendums is higher when they are held in conjunction with a regular provincial election rather than a by-election or a plebiscite. So those were the 8 factors that they seem to think were barriers to the success of the 4 referendums that have been attempted on PR in Canada.
And half of them come back to education again.
That's right. People need to understand the need for change and then what the change will actually accomplish.
Yeah.
So if the government in power would take the lead, you wouldn't have to have a referendum, right? They could propose this and they could put it through as a piece of legislation.
That's right.
Okay.
And I think under our current 2-party system where there's so much resistance to it, it's probably going to take that kind of leadership to just step up and say,
Yeah.
we got to make elections fair in Canada, and this is the way to do it, folks.
You know, the publicity for this was good. I got emails from Sam, it was in the paper, about a half, what will it take people to get interested? Because everybody, sitting at Tim Hortons, wherever they are, is going to bitch about the government. They're going to a bunch of crooks, the whole thing. Here's an opportunity for people to come here, listen to an alternative, that makes sense, it's reasonable, it's rational, and that works in other constituencies, and yet there's maybe 5 people that are not, that are independent from the organization, from the organizers, and that's a challenge.
Sad, yeah.
I mean, because everything you're saying makes sense. It makes perfect sense to me that there would be so much more democratic, much fair, you get more diversity, all sorts of reasons why that would work. But nobody seems to care.
But we're turned off. We don't believe in our political system.
Well, when you look at 20 years, or barely 25 years, the turnout, the voter turnout to diminish.
81 to 63, that's a huge change in a short time.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a cynic, but probably the majority of the population don't know what proportional or representation mean, what the words mean. Because a candidate in the last election didn't know what the word transparency meant at a public meeting we had. What?
He thought it was a sexual thing. So we're a family party, we don't go there.
So, I mean, they just don't know or they don't care, or both.
Well, we deserve the political system that we have.
They do. They do.
No,
People who don't agree with us do.
Do you remember the wording of the PEI referendum? Because I do remember that referendum going through, and I thought it was very misleading.
Well, Quebec did that too, right?
But I'm
Do you
sorry, I
remember?
don't think I have that with
Yeah,
me.
because I think that was intentional.
Of course.
It was awkwardly worded.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It made no sense at all.
Well, wasn't there an issue in one of the Quebec referenda where it could have been taken either way, and there was a challenge to that after. I can't remember which one, but the wording was,
Well, it's always the big debate on Quebec separation, the wording of the question.
yeah, the last
Separate,
one, it was
yes or
huge,
no?
because I think the one before the last one was awkward.
Yeah.
What's that?
I'm just checking, I've got the Fair Vote Canada analysis here, and I'm trying to see if they actually referenced the wording, and they haven't. They just said that it's an important factor, but they didn't say what it actually was in each of those four referenda.
What was the last national referendum? Was it the Charlottetown Accord? Was that the last time they had a national referendum? That was a national referendum, if I remember correctly. Like, we haven't had one for the death penalty, I remember.
New Brunswick has had one, and it was about BLTs. When was that, 2001, something like that? By people who analyze democracies, they really don't like referenda because it's too easy to influence an either or, yes or no, black or white vote.
If you would have taken a referendum on the gay marriage issue or on some of these others, forget it, we always talk about tyranny of the majority. You always need to be careful about that sort of
That's
thing.
right.
Right, because in Nazi Germany, it was, the Nuremberg laws were legal. People voted. They were passed by the legislature. And we know what happened after that. So.
I just came from a meeting this afternoon with the new energy minister because we wanted to talk with them about the conditions that are required in order for the moratorium on shale gas to be lifted. And specifically, we know from our lawyer, but also several other lawyers, that nowhere is there a jurisdiction that has really defined what social license means. Okay? And the big issue there is the abuse by a majority. How do you decide? Where's the threshold on social license? It's not an easy thing to determine. If it was 50% plus one, that's the bully wins.
But how do you determine 50% plus one of the social license? It's not like there's a social license survey. Well, yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, the tyranny of the majority is what we're talking about here.
That's right.
First past the post is the tyranny of the majority.
Yeah. No, I agree.
The 51% gets to call the shots for everybody.
Yeah.
That's why our legal action on that particular issue, I don't want to sidetrack this on the shale gas, but our legal action is to take the scientific evidence, the peer-reviewed scientific evidence of what the results on health and the environment in other jurisdictions that have been doing fracking for several years, and say that experience is transferable to New Brunswick. We can suggest if fracking produced this in Texas, Utah, Pennsylvania, okay, there's no reason why that process will produce different results in New Brunswick. We don't have to make those mistakes in order to find out that they're real. Okay, so our suit is lined so that we're trying to go to the Supreme Court of Canada because the Section 7 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is that it says specifically that you cannot make a public policy decision that compromises the security of the person. And currently, there are precedents at the Supreme Court level that includes health and the quality of water. So what we're saying is that the scientific evidence about the harmful effects of unconventional oil and gas extraction, there's strong enough evidence that it compromises the security of the person, and therefore the Supreme Court of Canada must strike it down.
Was the last election, was that, did you see that as a referendum on shale gas? I mean, the results?
I don't want to pat ourselves on the back for the victory, but I think we were able to mobilize enough people to question the wisdom of the previous government, and they weren't prepared at all to look at the pros and cons. All they wanted was to promote what the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, what they wanted. If they had looked at the scientific evidence, I don't think David Allred could have come to the same conclusion that we need to produce this. But they refused to look at the other side of the story. Our feeling is that there's so much evidence that this is a decision that really should be made by the Supreme Court of Canada, because even though shale gas development is nowhere near as influential on climate change as the Alberta tar sands are, it's the piece of the action that we have some say in because it's going to happen here. But as far as we're concerned, the real issue is climate change, and that if we don't do something quick, then we're going to be in real trouble. And so that's why we felt we had to go to the Supreme Court. Anyway, sorry for that commercial message. I don't think you have any trouble figuring out which side of that issue I'm on. But my side of that issue is that we know that the public health of New Brunswickers will be compromised if we allow that to go ahead. It's going to be even more compromised if we triple the production of the tar sands, because the impact of climate change is going to be huge. Sorry. That's the last commercial message.
I see that if it does come to an election, and this is how you're recommending, or this council recommended that this would come about, the changes would have to happen. I mean, this is going to be on a long list of election issues, so it's, I don't know, as a government would want to put that in their platform, because, you know, if you're putting it in there with health and education, and then people may vote against this, like for instance, if somebody is a dyed-in-the-wool liberal or conservative, they're not going to want to change perhaps because it might threaten their party. So a party that proposes this as part of their platform could essentially lose a lot of votes over this.
It could.
So it's not very likely.
It would make me nervous if I was the leader of the dominant parties.
So it's a pretty
On the
gutsy
other hand, the
decision.
party that does have it in their platform and emphasizes that, and people become educated again.
So could you vote conservative?
Could I?
Yeah. If this was on the ballot.
Well,
Could that happen?
Depends on what the other
can hell freeze over?
That's what I'm talking about. It's just,
No, if,
that
it
would
would
be
certainly
that's
consider it if it was
process,
part of
that's
their platform.
well, that's what I'm
And
saying.
if there are other planks were more in my way of thinking, sure, you know. But,
Now,
you know, I
when they were
voted
saying
liberal in
that-
my day in NDP.
When they were saying that it should take place in conjunction with a regular scheduled election, that doesn't mean that it wasn't a referendum. It's just that it's harder to get voter turnout for an independent referendum
Yeah, I
than
understand.
it is for a referendum vote that's taken at the same time as a provincial or federal election.
Oh, I see. So you're saying it's not part of their platform, it's just, it's at a referendum at election time.
Yeah, it's right on this ballot. Right on the ballot
Like
at the
in
bottom.
Maine, you know, Maine has their, you vote for the party, and then they'll have 5 or 6.
Other
right
things
up,
to do.
yeah,
That's right.
which is a pretty efficient way to do it.
Yeah.
But my great hope is that we'll have a leader that will just step up and say, folks, it's an idea whose time has come, and let's not subject this to a lot of political debate. Let's just do it.
You might call it equal opportunity.
Yeah.
That's an original thought there, Keith.
Well, I mean, the question of bringing it in on a trial basis, that hasn't been done though.
Has it ever been reversed? Has any jurisdiction ever gone proportional? And then,
I can't honestly answer that for you, I don't know.
because you said one of your points was that citizen satisfaction with government and with the results of the election goes up with.
Goes up with the proportional.
So I
And
can't.
I think it's probably emotional that people actually think that the vote counted.
Yeah, well,
I think that's the
that's the
big
whole
issue.
point, isn't it?
Yeah,
The other
and that's more important than whether it counted equally.
Yeah.
The other question I have is, what would be the cost of bringing in a system like this? First of all, the referendum, but then also to implement it.
I spoke with Mike, what's his last name? The Chief Electoral Officer?
Quinn?
Mike Quinn. At the top, in 2010, when we were having this conversation with David Olive, he didn't think that it would be terribly complicated in order to change the system, or very terribly expensive. It would involve an educational process. This is if the government decided to just do it. It would be in the lead up to the election. There would be a thorough and simplified explanation of that handout that I gave you of the two ballots. Okay, and here's the way that it'll go. And I think that by having the compromise, it allows you to still elect your specific MLA for your constituency, so you get that direct representation, combined with the regional representatives. I think you've answered some of the questions that would bother most people.
How do you establish these regions?
Well, in this, at the time of 2004, when this report was developed, the migration of Acadians to Dieppe hadn't taken place, for one thing. So that complication wasn't there. So that you could say, we could fairly divide the province into 4 areas that were culturally unique and had as significant a number of voters in there as we're able to accomplish it. I mean, you're never going to change it. I mean, the 3 large cities are all in the southern end of the province. 2 of them in the southwest, and 1 of them in the southeast. But they felt that the cultural, the agricultural component of the Northwest, combined with the Acadian representation in the Northeast, and then the urban in the Southwest and the Southeast, that was probably as close as you were going to come to a cultural and ethnic representation. But again, they knew it wasn't perfect. But it was a simplified way of dividing up the proportional vote.
And that's established by the Electoral Commission?
Yes. Yeah, an independent electoral commission. The current one is not elected. It's not an independent, because it's appointed. I'm not saying that Mike Quinn isn't.
So how do you establish an independent one if you don't appoint them, or?
It will probably have to be an appointment by an all-party panel. That would be my guess. Say that we as a group of party leaders say that we trust that this person is knowledgeable enough to do it and will do it fairly, regardless of influence from any one or combination of us.
Good luck with that.
But look how much of a controversy there was when we switched to the method of counting the votes this time. Whenever you introduce a brand new system, there's going to be glitches, okay? And Mike was really hammered on the vote counting. You know, for something that really wasn't his fault. It was a mechanical difficulty that happened. But the press really hopped on the issue and made him the focus of the criticism. And whenever you bring in a new system like that, there's going to be glitches.
I think the computer counting of votes takes all the drama and excitement out of election day. Used to be you had to stay up till 11 o'clock, now 8:15, gone. No fun.
So that's all I can tell you about what I know. I believe that of all the systems, that the mixed member is probably the one that is closest to meeting the needs for local representation as well as the proportional.
The one thing I thought of just now about this regional thing is how does that translate into province-wide? How is that going to affect the proportions?
And if 70% of the population lives in the southwest and southeast of the province, then how do you make the representatives from the northwest and the northeast equal to those that...
Forced migration to the north. Get people number off 1 to 800,000, roughly. The first 200,000 go north, south, west, east, and then families can rejoin, but you have to keep the balance. It's just a suggestion.
The devil is in the details.
There has been some talk about having an alliance or an amalgamation of the Atlantic provinces. Would that make any difference, or
Maritime Union.
Acadia.
would that make it easier or harder? Or?
I think it would be harder to sell,
Yeah.
because I think the provincial loyalties are stronger than we may expect that they are.
Yeah.
I think proportionate would be easier to sell than the amalgamation of the 3 maritime and the 4 Atlantic provinces.
Although amalgamation would give us more clout federally.
Yeah.
And we could claim Anne Murray as part of our... She was.
So
And who?
I really appreciate you coming to, this is a drive.
There's a way that you could sex it up, because I don't find it dry. I don't think anybody else here does either. I think it's fascinating, but most people don't. And that's, you can go into a grade 1 class and structure the grade 1 class, have student representation using proportional representation, not even mentioning the words till they get to grade 5. And say, this is what you've been doing for 4 years, now you've got to do it a little bit more seriously, and it's going to have a bigger impact on your life. I mean, there's got to be ways to do it. I mean, literally, a few of us have been at it for years, through 3 successive governments to implement citizenship. They just won't do it.
You have to pound the point that your vote will count, even if you're voting for the last party, your vote is going to count.
That's the real issue.
Yeah, and that's what what you have to promote.
When you hear people say
rank
they're
and
all crooks,
file.
and what's the point? They're all the same. And that's what you hear. Once
Yeah.
you hear that, you know you lost them.
And for instance, in a school election, you could use both systems, and you could have the protest vote, and here's the proportional, and here's the difference that it produced, folks. And you use it as an example. You make it live, so that people can make it tangible.
real.
Another thing you didn't touch on, but I read before I came, I went online, and that is the strategic voting becomes a lot less
That's right.
attractive under a proportional
Yeah,
representation.
because you can split your vote. You can say, I really like Joe, even though he's a PC.
Yeah,
But I really believe in the Green Party platform,
yeah,
and it gives you a chance to do both.
yeah.
I want to thank you
Yeah.
for speaking to us today. It was very interesting, and I hope, by the way, I hope I want to encourage you to take it other places too. All the work you've done to prepare for this, and some other people hear about it in other parts of the province. Maybe you can go to all 4 regions. Just one last thing I want to mention is if anybody here wants to have information about future events, if you leave your name and email address over there, then I can send you information about upcoming events and so on. And-
We could announce the next one
Oh,
in February.
yes.
We have scheduled to have Hugh Williams speak to us.
Actually, that's in March.
Oh, March, you're right, We're still scheduled in February. Anyway, March. Hugh Williams will be talking to us. Can the human services survive in the New Brunswick economy? So it's about the economics of the human service industry. He's working with a coalition of human service organizations to try to craft legislation and policy which will get a better economic situation for human service workers. So Hugh will be talking about that on March,
That'll be the
last Tuesday in March.
So it was the last Tuesday of the month, so
Okay.
in March,
Yeah.
whatever day that is.
February is yet to be.
And we have working on something for February. It might be David Kuhn who might be coming to speak to us about his vision of the future. So thanks everyone for coming, and
I put my coat on because I thought we were over, but never mind.